Hey guys, tonight we begin our exploration of whale oil, an unsung hero of the 18th century. Imagine a world where light came only from candles or lamps, and the idea of flicking a switch to illuminate your space was a fantasy far beyond anyone's wildest dreams. It was whale oil that made those dimly lit evenings not just possible, but comfortable. Now, before you start imagining yourself in a whaling ship battling the elements in search of these massive creatures, remember this. You probably won't survive the process. Whaling back then was brutal and dangerous, and it's an entire story in itself. But tonight, we're more concerned with how that very oil, which came from those enormous creatures of the deep, changed the way people lived in their homes. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop a comment below with your location and what time it is where you are right now. It's always fascinating to see how far and wide these little bedtime journeys travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The 18th century was a time of transition. From the beginning of the century through the end, people's lives began to transform in dramatic ways. One of the most surprising shifts was the growing importance of whale oil, a substance you might not expect to have much of a role in shaping the modern world, but in homes across Europe and the Americas, whale oil was as indispensable as bread, milk, or any other staple. It started as a rare commodity, but quickly became one of the most sought-after products in the world. The demand for whale oil reached such a fever pitch that it drove one of the most lucrative industries of the time, whaling. Whales were hunted not just for meat, but primarily for the valuable oil stored in their blubber. In fact, the whaling industry became so widespread that entire economies began to rely on it. We're talking about a global network of hunters, traders, and merchants, all connected by the pursuit of oil that would light the world. Now, let's take a step back for a moment to picture the 18th century home. Imagine you're sitting by a hearth, and the only light in the room is from a flickering whale oil lamp. It's a far cry from the soft, constant glow we're used to today. Right whale oil lamps gave off a steady light, not like the flickering of a candle. It wasn't just about visibility, it was about atmosphere, warmth, and comfort. You can almost feel the warmth from those lamps, the way it would reflect off the brass of the nearby fixtures or dance on the walls of a dimly lit room. The whiff of oil would be faint, though much less pungent than that of a burning candle. It made the evening hours feel a bit more like home. And this was just the beginning. As the 1700s unfolded, whaling became more than just a method of survival. It was a booming industry. In the early years, whale oil was more of a luxury product, something for the rich or the elite. Imagine it as the equivalent of today's fancy candles, only a lot more expensive and harder to come by. But soon enough, whale oil would become a global commodity, and the whaling industry would be one of the driving forces behind colonial expansion and trade. If you've ever wondered how something so obscure could end up being so important, you're not alone. Historians still argue over when exactly whale oil truly transitioned from luxury to necessity. Was it in the 18th century, the early 19th, but by the end of the 1700s, it was undeniably everywhere. The need for whale oil was primarily driven by its many uses. In the beginning, people didn't fully understand its versatility. But once the potential was realized, demand surged. It wasn't just about lighting lamps anymore, Whale oil became indispensable in various industries. The primary driver of this, of course, was the fact that it burned cleaner than other oils, producing a steadier light with less smoke. So, for homes across Europe and the Americas, whale oil was used not only for illumination, but also for heating. Picture it. Cozy evenings, a whale oil lamp burning softly in the corner, keeping the chill at bay. For people who lived in northern climates, this kind of warmth was a luxury that few could do without. Let's take a moment to consider just how much of a game changer this oil was. You may think of oil today as something used exclusively for fueling your car or your kitchen stove. But back then, whale oil was one of the few sources of fuel for the most basic of everyday needs. There was nothing like it to ensure long-lasting light during those long, dark nights. While today, we turn to electricity with the flick of a switch. Imagine a time when lighting up your home required careful management of this precious liquid. Whale oil lamps became an essential part of daily life. And for anyone without access to candles or wood-burning fires, they were a lifesaver. Historians still argue about the early days of whaling, whether it started as a small, localized industry in places like the Arctic or if it was part of an already thriving global trade network. Some say it was a necessary component of the transatlantic trade route, while others believe it became a large-scale operation only after certain technological advancements. Either way, the rise of whale oil transformed not just individual households, but entire economies, with whaling centers like Nantucket and New Bedford becoming hubs of commerce. And all of this started with the simple act of chasing a giant sea creature, an animal that could provide more than just meat for a meal. Now, it's important to note that whaling wasn't just for oil. The blubber of the whale was rendered down to extract the oil. But other parts of the whale had uses too. The bones were turned into tools and products, from the harpoons used to catch more whales to the combs and brushes used by everyday people. Whale oil, however, was the golden commodity, and the industry grew at a rapid pace to meet demand. Let's dive into one of the most prominent uses of whale oil during the 18th century: lighting. Before the widespread use of whale oil, homes had to rely on far less efficient methods to illuminate the night. Candles were expensive and didn't burn for long, while fires were a bit too unpredictable for comfort. The whale oil lamp, however, offered a steady, reliable light. It was the must-have accessory for every home, and soon, whale oil lamps became as common as the furniture you'd find in any living room today. These lamps worked by slowly burning the whale oil, and the resulting flame was much brighter and steadier than that of a candle. Imagine the feeling of walking into a room dimly lit by the warm, flickering light of a whale oil lamp. The light wasn't the bright, cold, harsh white we're used to now. It was soft and amber, casting a cozy glow over everything it touched. People would use these lamps to read, to gather with family, or even to entertain guests in the evening. Whale oil didn't just provide light, it created an atmosphere. But it wasn't all luxury. For some, whale oil lamps were practical necessities. People who lived in the northern parts of Europe, where winters could last for months, found whale oil to be an essential part of their survival. It kept homes lit during the long, dark nights. In fact, in places like Norway and Iceland, whale oil lamps weren't just for comfort, they were critical for making sure people could see to do their work or take care of their families. You can imagine the sense of relief they must have felt as they lit a lamp, knowing the dark would be chased away, if only for a few hours. Now, The oil itself wasn't exactly the most pleasant-smelling thing. There was a distinct odor to burning whale oil, a fishy, greasy scent that clung to everything. But this wasn't much of a deterrent at the time. People were more concerned with functionality than fragrance. And besides, that smell was part of everyday life, like the scent of wood smoke that's so familiar in rural areas today. If you'd lived in the 18th century, the smell of burning whale oil might have been as comforting to you as the fresh scent of pine would be to us now. Historians still argue whether whale oil was actually superior to other oils available at the time. Some say it was the best option for indoor lighting, while others claim there were other alternatives that could have done the job just as well. Regardless of the debate, one thing is clear. Whale oil transformed home lighting in a way that was far beyond anything people had used before. It became a staple of daily life, not only in terms of practicality, but in terms of the experience of living in the 18th century. In addition to household lighting, whale oil lamps also had an impact on public spaces. Imagine walking down a cobblestone street in a major European city. Streets that were poorly lit by candle lanterns or simple torches. Whale oil lamps quickly became a common feature of street lighting in cities across Europe, allowing for a new level of urban nighttime activity. People could stay out later, socialize, and go about their business after dark. It wasn't just about safety, though. It was about the pace of life itself. Whale oil helped extend the hours of the day, giving people more time to do what they needed to do, and creating an entirely new rhythm to society's daily schedule. Now that we've illuminated the role of whale oil in home lighting, let's take a step back and explore its broader impact on the economy during the 18th century. Whale oil wasn't just a household commodity. It was a central player in the global trade network of the time. In fact, it was one of the most valuable exports of the American colonies, especially for places like New England. With the demand for whale oil increasing steadily throughout the century, it became a driving force behind the economy of colonial America. The economic ripple effects of whale oil were far-reaching. Whaling ships sailed across the Atlantic, from the bustling harbors of New England to far-off whaling grounds off the coast of Africa, South America, and even the Arctic Circle. These voyages weren't short. They could last months, even years. But the profits were staggering. Whale oil was in demand not only in Europe, but also in burgeoning industries in the Americas. Entire towns and port cities thrived because of this oil. In New Bedford and Nantucket, two of the most famous whaling towns in Massachusetts, the industry provided thousands of jobs, ranging from shipbuilders to sailors, to the men who actually processed the whale oil. The entire region's economy was tied to whaling, and by extension, to the oil that came from these enormous sea creatures. In a way, whale oil served as an economic lifeline for many colonies, especially as they were carving out their place in the world. Whaling became so important that the entire rhythm of life in coastal towns revolved around it. Ships would leave port, heading out into the vast ocean to hunt whales, while their families and workers stayed behind, maintaining the infrastructure that supported the trade. But it wasn't just the coastal towns that benefited. Whale oil also fueled urban industries far inland. Take a moment to think about it. A bustling New York City, in the midst of its own growth, would have needed a constant supply of whale oil to keep the lights on, the factories running, and the machinery churning. Whale oil wasn't just for lamps. It was used in the manufacture of other products like soap, leather, and textiles. The very fabrics you'd wear, be they sturdy wool or soft silks, were treated with whale oil to make them more durable and resistant to wear and tear. Historians still debate the long-term economic effects of whaling on the American colonies. Some argue that without the whaling industry, the growth of cities like New York or Boston might have been delayed, while others claim the economic impact was overstated. Regardless of which side of the debate you fall on, there's no denying that whale oil played an essential role in shaping the economic landscape of the 18th century. It wasn't just the fuel that powered homes, it powered entire economies. But there's more to the story. Whale oil didn't just fuel light or industry. It also became a catalyst for social and cultural change. It provided the resources necessary for urban growth, allowing for a more connected world. For the first time, people from different parts of the globe could engage with one another on a more equal footing. Whale oil allowed people to live longer hours, produce more goods, and communicate across greater distances. In short, it helped accelerate the pace of life itself. Now that we've explored the economic boom fueled by whale oil, let's turn our attention to one of its more peculiar uses, soap. You probably wouldn't expect whale oil to play a major role in soap making. But during the 18th century, it was one of the primary ingredients in many soaps. The luxury of cleanliness was made possible by the oil that came from the very creatures that now populated the oceans. Whale oil wasn't just a commodity for light or heat. It was the secret behind some of the smoothest, creamiest soaps of the era. Soap wasn't as common or as accessible in the 18th century as it is today. In fact, the process of making soap was a carefully guarded craft, often practiced by skilled artisans. These soapers, as they were known, would combine various fats and oils to create a thick paste, which would then be molded into bars. Whale oil, because of its rich, smooth texture, made for an ideal base in soap making. It produced a high-quality lather that was less harsh on the skin than other oils available at the time, and it helped to preserve the soap for longer periods. Picture it, your grandmother, perhaps, washing her hands with soap that was a bit of a luxury for most people. The creamy lather would have felt soft and gentle on her skin, something you could easily take for granted today. Back in the 1700s, though, soap like that was a rare indulgence, something to be prized and valued. The use of whale oil in soap making wasn't just about hygiene, it was a mark of status. The finer soaps were expensive, and only the wealthier classes could afford them. The masses, well, they often had to make do with much more basic, homemade soaps, which weren't nearly as luxurious or effective at cleaning. But this use of whale oil wasn't just about creating a clean body. It was also about creating a clean home. Soap, especially those made from whale oil, was prized for its ability to remove grime and dirt, not just from the skin, but also from clothing and household surfaces. Wealthier families would have their clothing washed with these luxurious whale oil-based soaps, keeping their garments fresh and spotless. And this isn't just a fanciful notion. In the 18th century, keeping up appearances was a huge deal. People didn't just want to be clean, they wanted to show the world they were clean. This meant that soap, like whale oil, had a deeper cultural significance. Historians still debate whether whale oil-based soaps were truly superior to other soaps made from animal fats. Some argue that the fine texture of whale oil made the best soap, while others claim the environmental cost of whaling couldn't be justified by the luxury of a bar of soap. Regardless, this practice became so widespread that it was woven into the fabric of daily life. Whether or not whale oil soaps were better, they were certainly more popular and far more accessible to those with the means to buy them. It's curious to think about how whale oil's role in the cleanliness of the 18th century wasn't just about personal hygiene. It was about the kind of lifestyle that could be sustained only by having access to such a precious resource. Whale oil soaps helped define a class system where certain families were able to demonstrate their wealth and taste not only by their clothing, but by their cleanliness. And when we look back at these practices, it's easy to forget that the luxury of being clean often came at the expense of a creature who had to give up its life for it. While whale oil might seem like a strange addition to your skincare routine today, it was also widely used in early cosmetics. That's right. Whale oil was a key ingredient in lotions, balms, and skincare products, making it one of the earliest foundations for beauty regimens. It wasn't just about cleanliness. It was about luxury, smooth skin, and an almost ethereal glow. You might think of lotions today as something simple to pick up at a store, but back in the 18th century, these products were more of a novelty, crafted carefully by artisans and often reserved for those with a bit more money to spend. Cosmetic products made from whale oil were often touted as having moisturizing properties that could transform dry, chapped skin. Considering that this was a time when people regularly battled harsh weather conditions, particularly in Northern Europe. A little extra help from whale oil made a huge difference. Imagine, for a moment, someone from the 1700s applying a lotion infused with whale oil. Their skin would have felt softer, soothed by the oil's rich texture. If you were wealthy, you might even own a special jar of whale oil-based skin cream, something you could show off to your friends. It wasn't just functional, it was a luxury item, a symbol of your status. But it wasn't just lotions. Whale oil was also a major ingredient in early perfumes. Early perfume recipes often used whale oil as a base to carry the scent, allowing the fragrance to last longer and stay more vivid. The whales that had given up their oil, once again, became a part of a deeper cultural trend. When you think about it, it's fascinating that the very creatures whose oils were used to light lamps and create soaps also played a role in defining what people smelled like. If you walked into a room in the 1700s, you might have been greeted by the soft glow of whale oil lamps and the lingering scent of whale oil-based perfume, a combination that would have been quite a signature of that time. Historians still argue whether the use of whale oil in cosmetics was more about social status than actual skincare. Some say it was all about looking the part, especially for the wealthier classes who could afford these expensive products. Others claim it was simply effective. It helped keep the skin from drying out in the cold, harsh winters. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. Regardless of the reasons, the cosmetic use of whale oil played a significant role in society's view of beauty and hygiene. The oil had transformed from a mere necessity for light and heat into an essential part of personal care. What's even more surprising is that whale oil didn't just stay confined to personal beauty. Some 18th century cosmetics, particularly those made for high society women, were complex mixtures, often including a variety of oils, whale oil included. These products were designed to give a soft, even complexion, a desirable trait at the time. It was about creating an ideal of beauty that often took inspiration from the smooth, polished surfaces of wealthy homes, where whale oil was used to clean and polish furniture as well. There's something poetic about how this oil, which came from the rough, wild seas, was able to smooth and beautify lives on land. While whale oil's role in personal care and cosmetics might seem like an unexpected twist, it wasn't just beauty products that benefited from its slippery, luxurious qualities. The textile industry also found plenty of use for whale oil, particularly in the treatment and preservation of fabrics. You might be surprised to learn that whale oil was a key ingredient in making some of the finest fabrics of the time even more luxurious and long-lasting. This isn't something that most people think about when they think of oil. But whale oil played an essential role in creating the smooth, durable textiles that were highly prized in the 18th century. Textiles were one of the cornerstones of the growing global economy during this period. And the process of preserving and softening fabrics was a skill that many in the industry had perfected. Whale oil was prized for its ability to make fabrics more pliable and resistant to damage. Fabrics like wool and silk were treated with whale oil to improve their durability and feel. The process of oiling the fabric made it softer to the touch, giving it a more luxurious quality that was highly sought after by the wealthy. You can imagine the fine, soft silks that would have been worn by the elite. Garments that had been treated with whale oil to ensure they were smooth, supple, and able to withstand the test of time. It wasn't just about softness, though. Whale oil was also used to preserve these fabrics, preventing them from becoming brittle and deteriorating over time. Clothing made from whale oil-treated fabric would last longer, resisting wear and tear from daily use. For the wealthy, this meant an investment in garments that could be worn for years, if not decades. It was a time when fashion was about more than just style. It was about durability and quality. Whale oil helped ensure that the clothes people wore, from fine silks to robust wool coats, would last through the seasons, taking on a soft, rich sheen that added to the garment's overall value. Historians still debate whether whale oil was actually more effective than other oils used in textiles. Some suggest that it was an essential part of fabric preservation, while others claim that alternatives, like animal fats, could do just as well. Regardless of the arguments, the use of whale oil in textiles reflects the broader cultural and economic importance of whale oil at the time. Whale oil wasn't just an energy source, it was an ingredient in the very fabric of 18th century life. Quite literally. But beyond just the materials, whale oil also played a significant role in the production of other luxury items. The leather industry, for example, used whale oil to soften and waterproof materials. Many of the fine leather goods of the time, shoes, gloves, belts, were treated with whale oil to improve their quality and longevity. In fact, some of the highest quality leather products were often distinguished by the rich finish they obtained from the application of whale oil. It's interesting to think about how a single substance could have had such a wide range of uses. Whale oil wasn't just a byproduct of a hunting industry. It was a transformative force that shaped multiple aspects of everyday life, from what people wore to how they lived, and even to the comfort of their own homes. While whale oil's role in textiles and cosmetics might seem impressive, its reach didn't stop there. One of the more practical, if somewhat overlooked, uses of whale oil was in the kitchen. You probably didn't know that whale oil was once a key ingredient in cooking. But in the 18th century, it had a variety of uses in the culinary world. Given that refrigeration hadn't been invented yet, whale oil helped preserve food and, perhaps most surprisingly, was even used for frying. This might sound strange today, but back then, it was one of the few oils that could withstand high cooking temperatures without burning or smoking too much. Whale oil's ability to maintain a consistent temperature made it ideal for frying, a technique that was becoming increasingly popular in the 1700s. Imagine a bustling kitchen in a home or even a tavern, where cooks would use whale oil to fry up all sorts of dishes. Foods like meats, pastries, and vegetables could be fried to crispy perfection using whale oil. In some parts of the world, whale oil was even used to make the earliest versions of things like French fries, though the exact recipes are lost to time. It's likely that early fried potatoes were cooked in the rich, stable oil of whales. But the use of whale oil in cooking wasn't just about frying. It was also used as a cooking fat in some savory dishes. Whale oil was considered a good fat for adding richness and depth of flavor to stews, soups, and sauces. Because it was a liquid at room temperature, it was easier to measure and mix than some other fats, like butter or lard. The fact that whale oil was so widely available meant that it became a kitchen staple in many homes, especially for those who lived near the coast, where the whaling industry thrived. Historians still argue whether whale oil was the best option for cooking. Some claim it was more efficient and practical than other cooking oils of the time, while others point out that the flavor and smell of whale oil could sometimes make food less appetizing. There's also the environmental concern, as the heavy reliance on whale oil led to a decline in whale populations over time. But for those living in the 18th century, the practical benefits outweighed any potential downsides. What's especially fascinating is how whale oil's culinary role reflects the way people of the time had to be resourceful. They weren't using it simply because it was a convenient byproduct of whaling. It was a necessity. The use of whale oil in cooking shows just how integral this commodity was to the everyday life of people during the 1700s. It wasn't just something they used to light their homes or soften their skin. It was central to the way they ate, prepared their food, and nourished their families. As we think about this, it's remarkable how a single product from the ocean could have such a profound effect on so many facets of life. Whale oil wasn't just one of the many products that came out of a whaling ship. It was an essential building block of an entire economy, an industry, and a way of life. Whether it was lighting up a room, preserving food, or making a dish delicious, whale oil had a hand in shaping the 18th century in ways that went far beyond what we typically imagine when we think of this once ubiquitous substance. If you're beginning to get the sense that whale oil was used for almost everything during the 18th century, you're not far off. It wasn't just for lighting, cooking, or cosmetics. Whale oil was also crucial for preserving food. In a time before refrigeration, keeping food fresh for long periods was a constant challenge. Without the ability to store perishable goods in cool environments, people had to rely on methods like drying, salting, and pickling to make sure their food didn't spoil. And, of course, whale oil played a significant role in this preservation process. For many in the 18th century, whale oil was used to coat and preserve meats, particularly fish, which were often caught in excess during fishing seasons. Whale oil served as a barrier, preventing spoilage by keeping oxygen away from the food. This was especially important for coastal communities that had to stockpile food for the long winter months when fresh provisions weren't as readily available. Fish, for example, was often packed in barrels filled with whale oil, keeping it fresh for much longer than simple salt or drying could. This method of preservation allowed coastal towns to extend their supplies and ensured that people had access to protein during the harsher seasons. Beyond just fish, whale oil was also used to preserve other foods, including vegetables and fruits, though it wasn't the primary method for preserving produce. It was used in combination with other methods to help extend shelf life. Imagine a pantry stocked with fruits and vegetables coated in oil, keeping the freshness intact despite the lack of modern-day preservation methods. This might sound strange to us today, but for the people of the 1700s, it was a practical and reliable solution. The fact that whale oil could be used in this way highlights its importance in sustaining life during times when access to fresh food was often unpredictable. Historians still debate how widely this practice was used. whether it was a common technique employed in most households or something more niche for wealthier families who had access to whale oil. While some suggest it was more prevalent among the middle and upper classes, others point to evidence suggesting that whale oil preservation techniques were more widespread than we might assume. The truth is likely somewhere in between. But what's clear is that whale oil served as a critical tool for ensuring that people had enough food to get through the lean months. One interesting aspect of food preservation with whale oil is its connection to the global economy. The same oil that was used to light lamps in Europe and America was also involved in global trade routes that transported food to far-off markets. Whale oil acted as a form of currency in trade agreements, with its value helping to move goods from one continent to another, and beyond just trade. Whale oil's preservation power also had an impact on the way people lived in distant lands. It allowed merchants to transport food safely over long distances, opening the door for international commerce and cultural exchange. As we look back at this practice, it's interesting to consider how people during the 18th century adapted to their environment and made the most out of the resources they had. Whale oil wasn't just a commodity. It was a multi-purpose tool that served a variety of needs, from feeding people to keeping them warm, clean, and lit. Its ability to preserve food was one of the many ways it became an essential part of daily life. While whale oil played a critical role in preserving food, its use wasn't confined to domestic needs. It was also considered a cure-all in 18th century medicine. When you think of whale oil today, the first thing that might come to mind is its connection to light and luxury. But back then, it was believed to have an incredible array of medicinal properties. It wasn't uncommon for people to use whale oil as a treatment for everything from muscle pain to chronic ailments. It was touted as a soothing balm for sore joints, a remedy for dry skin, and even a solution for more serious conditions like asthma and tuberculosis. Whale oil was often used in ointments and salves, and its smooth, greasy texture made it easy to apply and absorb into the skin. It was believed to help alleviate aches and pains, particularly for people who worked long hours in difficult conditions. Imagine a farmer in the field, his body stiff from the day's work, applying a thick layer of whale oil to his joints, hoping to ease the pain. This wasn't just folklore. There was a widespread belief in the oil's healing power, and it was commonly used in various treatments, both in Europe and the American colonies. One particularly interesting use of whale oil was in treating respiratory conditions. In the 18th century, diseases like asthma and tuberculosis were widespread, and there were few treatments that actually worked. Doctors and herbalists often turned to whale oil to help relieve symptoms of these ailments. It was used in everything from inhalants to poultices placed on the chest to open up the airways. While we now know that whale oil wasn't an effective cure for these diseases at the time, it was one of the most accessible treatments available. Historians still argue about how effective whale oil really was as a medicine. Some say it was a miracle cure, while others point out that it was more likely just a placebo. After all, there were many other substances at the time, herbs, minerals, and other oils, that also claimed similar healing properties. Still, whale oil's popularity as a treatment can't be denied. Whether it worked or not, people believed in its power, and for many, it was a trusted solution when they had few other options. The use of whale oil in medicine also speaks to a broader cultural tendency at the time to look for natural remedies. People didn't have the advanced medical knowledge we have today, and much of their understanding of health and healing came from trial and error, combined with a heavy reliance on what was readily available in their environment. Whale oil, a natural substance harvested from the sea, was a logical candidate for medicinal use. The oil wasn't just something that made your home brighter or your skin smoother. It was a substance that seemed to have limitless possibilities, from cooking to curing ailments. But there's a darker side to this story. As demand for whale oil grew, so did the pressure on whaling industries to supply it. The more people believed in its healing properties, the more whales had to be hunted to meet that demand. This created a cycle of overexploitation that contributed to the eventual decline of whale populations. While whale oil was viewed as a miracle cure at the time, it came at a devastating cost to the very creatures that provided it. Behind the seemingly magical uses of whale oil lies a darker, more troubling reality: the impact of whaling on whale populations. As we've seen, whale oil was a product that people relied on for everything from lighting to food preservation, from cosmetics to medicine. It was essential for everyday life in the 18th century, and demand for it only increased as the century progressed. But at what cost? Whaling, by its very nature, was a brutal and environmentally damaging industry. The very creatures that provided this oil had to be hunted down and killed in order for the oil to be harvested. The methods used to hunt whales were nothing short of horrific. Whalemen would set out in small boats and use harpoons to strike the enormous creatures. Once the whale was harpooned, it was dragged alongside the ship, where it would be slaughtered for its blubber. The blubber would then be rendered into oil, and the whale's other parts, like bones and baleen, would be used for other purposes. It was a grisly and dangerous job, one that claimed the lives of many sailors who ventured out on whaling expeditions. But beyond the personal cost, there was the toll it took on whale populations. Historians still debate how much whaling contributed to the near extinction of certain whale species. Some argue that the whaling industry was responsible for the rapid decline of whale numbers, while others claim that overhunting wasn't the sole cause of the population drop, pointing to factors like climate change and changing sea conditions. What's clear, however, is that by the late 19th century, many whale species were dangerously close to extinction, and the once thriving whaling industry was forced into decline. The need for whale oil had created a voracious demand that couldn't be sustained forever, and eventually, the resource ran out. As the whaling industry continued to grow, so did the pressure on whalers to find more and more whales. In fact, some whalers started hunting not only the larger whales, but also smaller species, like the right whale and the sperm whale, which had previously been too difficult to catch. These smaller species, already vulnerable, were hit hard by this aggressive hunting strategy. What started as a seemingly sustainable industry quickly became one of overexploitation, driven by the high value placed on whale oil and the many products it enabled. The irony is that the very oil that lit homes, healed bodies, and fueled economies was also contributing to the destruction of the source itself. In the context of the 18th century, the relationship between humanity and nature was much less regulated than it is today. There was a sense of invincibility, a belief that the ocean was vast and untouchable, that its resources were endless. In retrospect, we can see how this mindset contributed to the environmental devastation that followed. What we often forget when we look back at history is how little people understood the long-term impact of their actions. Whaling was just one of many industries that operated without a clear understanding of sustainability. As whale oil's demand grew, there were some efforts to mitigate the environmental damage. Some early advocates for conservation attempted to call attention to the dwindling whale populations, but their voices were often drowned out by the economic and social forces driving the whaling industry. It wasn't until much later, when alternatives to whale oil began to emerge, that the whaling industry truly began to falter. But by then, many species of whales had already been pushed to the brink. It's a sobering reminder that the innovations and conveniences we often take for granted come with hidden costs. Costs that we don't always fully recognize until much later. While whale oil helped usher in an era of unprecedented economic growth and technological progress, it also left a legacy of environmental destruction. By the mid-19th century, the days of whale oil were numbered. The rise of new technologies and the discovery of alternative sources of oil began to overshadow the need for whale oil. And the whaling industry slowly began to decline. For decades, whale oil had been a linchpin of daily life. But the innovations that marked the Industrial Revolution soon offered alternatives that were more efficient, cost-effective, and sustainable. The introduction of kerosene, for example, provided a new, cleaner light source that didn't come at the cost of slaughtering whales. Kerosene was derived from petroleum, a resource that was much more abundant and far easier to extract than whale oil. As the oil industry took off, it quickly became apparent that kerosene could provide the same steady, clean light as whale oil, but without the need to venture out on dangerous whaling expeditions. The shift was swift. Within just a few decades, kerosene lamps began to replace the traditional whale oil lamps in homes across the globe. Kerosene was cheaper, more reliable, and readily available, making it an attractive alternative for the burgeoning middle class. With the advent of kerosene, whale oil lamps were phased out in favor of this new technology, as more and more people adopted kerosene as their primary light source. The demand for whale oil sharply declined, but the impact of the Industrial Revolution didn't stop there. The rapid growth of factories and new industries also led to the discovery of other substitutes for whale oil, including vegetable oils and synthetic alternatives. These new oils could be produced on a much larger scale and were often far less expensive than the precious whale oil that had once been the cornerstone of daily life. Historians still argue whether the rise of alternatives truly spelled the end for the whaling industry, or if it was the culmination of years of overexploitation. Some believe that whaling would have eventually died out due to the environmental impact of overhunting, regardless of technological advances. Others argue that the discovery of new oil sources, like kerosene, was the final nail in the coffin for whaling, offering a viable alternative just as whale populations were on the brink of collapse. Regardless of which side of the debate you fall on, it's clear that the transition from whale oil to these new alternatives marked the end of an era. The decline of whale oil wasn't just about the replacement of a fuel source. It also marked a shift in the way people thought about resources. The discovery of petroleum-based products, like kerosene and the rise of synthetic oils, began to change how people viewed the natural world. Whale oil had been seen as a renewable resource, something that could be harvested from the ocean without an understanding of the long-term effects of overexploitation. The Industrial Revolution, with its focus on efficiency and mass production, ushered in a new era of resource extraction, one that would come to define the modern age. As whale oil became less necessary, the whaling industry had to shift. Whalers adapted to the new demand for products like baleen, used in everything from corsets to umbrellas, and whale meat. But these products were no longer in as high demand as oil had been. The whaling industry went into decline, and by the late 19th century, commercial whaling had significantly diminished, though it would not completely disappear for several decades. The damage, however, had already been done. Many whale species that had once thrived in the world's oceans were now endangered. and it would take decades of international efforts to protect these animals from extinction. The decline of whale oil serves as a stark reminder of how innovation and overexploitation can sometimes go hand in hand. While whale oil helped power the growth of economies and industries during the 18th and early 19th centuries, its eventual decline marked the end of an era of unsustainable resource extraction. Though whale oil largely disappeared from the modern world by the late 19th century, its legacy didn't vanish entirely. While commercial whaling has become highly regulated and, in many places, illegal, the byproducts of whales still find their way into various industries. Whale oil's impact on human society has left a lasting imprint, and surprisingly, some of the practices it helped establish still resonate today. Though we no longer rely on whale oil as an everyday necessity, its influence can still be seen in the ways we approach alternative oils, sustainability, and conservation efforts. In the modern world, we've found new sources of oil for almost every function that whale oil once fulfilled. Kerosene, once the replacement for whale oil in lamps, is now largely replaced by electric lighting and other forms of fuel. But whale oil's broader influence on the world of petroleum and fossil fuels cannot be overstated. As the demand for whale oil declined, the rise of petroleum exploration surged, driving the development of a global oil industry. The very concept of extracting oil from natural sources was shaped in part by the widespread use of whale oil. It's ironic, in a way, that the shift from whale oil to petroleum-based products has made oil a central part of global economies today. But whale oil also played a key role in the early environmental consciousness that emerged in the 19th and 20th centuries. As whale populations dwindled and the environmental toll of whaling became undeniable, efforts to protect endangered species began to take shape. The decline of whale oil was one of the driving forces behind the establishment of modern conservation movements. In the mid-20th century, after decades of overhunting, international efforts like the International Whaling Commission, IWC, worked to protect whale populations and regulate whaling, ensuring that whales would have a chance at recovery. Ironically, it was the very overexploitation driven by the demand for whale oil that helped propel the global community into recognizing the importance of wildlife conservation. Even today, some industries still use byproducts from whales, though not in the same widespread way they once did. Whale blubber, for example, is sometimes used in cosmetics and health products. Though the practice is highly controversial and has been limited by international laws and conservation efforts. What is fascinating is that whale oil, as a concept, has persisted in our global consciousness. Even though the oil itself is no longer commonly used, the history of whale oil has made us more conscious of the impact of natural resource extraction, leading to a more sustainable mindset in many industries. Historians still argue about the long-term environmental impact of whale oil's disappearance. Was it the technological advances that allowed us to replace it that truly saved the whales? Or was it simply the unsustainable nature of the whaling industry that forced change? Some environmentalists claim that modern oil exploration has its own set of issues, and the demand for whale oil ultimately provided a blueprint for the widespread extraction of natural resources. However, others point out that the decline of whale oil led to the creation of laws and international agreements that would help protect marine life for generations to come. Today, whale oil is no longer a product of economic necessity. It's more of a historical footnote. However, its story has a lasting effect on how we think about resource extraction, sustainability, and conservation. What began as an essential commodity became a catalyst for change, leading to new attitudes and practices in how we manage and protect our environment. The legacy of whale oil isn't just in the past. It's embedded in the ongoing conversation about how humans interact with the natural world. It's a reminder of how innovation can both drive progress and create unforeseen consequences. And while we no longer rely on whale oil for light, warmth, or even health, its influence on our technological and environmental history endures. Looking back, historians often debate how whale oil shaped the culture and society of the 18th century. Some scholars argue that whale oil was central to the creation of modern society, providing both literal and metaphorical light to people's lives. It helped to propel the Industrial Revolution, fueling both the economy and the expansion of technological advancements. In fact, whale oil served as an important stepping stone for the development of other industries, from manufacturing to trade, all of which helped shape the world we know today. But was whale oil really as vital as we often think? Or did it merely exist as one part of a much larger societal shift? Historians still argue whether whale oil played a foundational role in the development of Western economies, or whether it was simply a luxury product that coincided with greater historical changes. Some suggest that the whaling industry was the backbone of the economic boom in port cities, making places like Nantucket, New Bedford, and later, New York, vital economic hubs. Whale oil allowed cities to function during the dark winter months. It lit homes and factories, and even powered the textile and soap industries. From the perspective of economic necessity, whale oil was one of the catalysts that drove modern capitalism, helping to build the infrastructure and industries that would dominate the global stage for centuries. On the other hand, some scholars argue that whale oil's role has been overstated. They suggest that the real driving forces behind the economic and technological changes of the time were the advent of steam power, the rise of coal, and the increasingly sophisticated methods of manufacturing that didn't rely on whale oil. These scholars argue that whale oil was simply a stopgap, a transitional resource that would eventually be replaced by more reliable and sustainable alternatives like kerosene and petroleum. This perspective doesn't completely disregard whale oil's impact. It just questions whether it was truly central to the grand scheme of historical change, or if it was simply a product that got caught up in the whirlwind of progress. In some ways, whale oil's cultural impact is also intertwined with the nature of human progress itself. Whales were harvested from the ocean in increasingly unsustainable ways, leading to a paradox where the very advancement of human society came at the expense of one of nature's most magnificent creatures. This tension between progress and environmental harm is something that is still relevant today, as modern industries continue to grapple with the consequences of overexploitation. Whale oil serves as an early example of how the demands of society can lead to the depletion of natural resources, lessons we're still learning to this day. Beyond its economic role, whale oil also influenced cultural and aesthetic ideals during the 18th century. The soft, warm glow of a whale oil lamp became synonymous with the comfort of the home. For many, it wasn't just the oil itself that was valued. It was the lifestyle it represented. Whale oil lamps offered a more refined and steady form of light than the flickering flame of a candle. In this sense, whale oil had a cultural cachet, being associated with wealth, sophistication, and a higher quality of life. Imagine sitting in a well-appointed drawing room in the 1700s, the lamp casting a soft glow as you read or converse. That light symbolized much more than just illumination. It was a statement of comfort, modernity, and status. But this ideal of warmth and comfort, associated with the whale oil lamp, came with its own set of contradictions. The very comfort it provided for people came at a great cost to the environment. The whales whose oil powered these lamps were being hunted relentlessly, their populations pushed to the brink of collapse by the insatiable demand. For many, the idea of living in a well-lit, comfortable home came at the expense of the well-being of an entire species. It's fascinating how something so simple, just lighting a lamp or using soap, can tie so closely to questions of ethical responsibility, environmental awareness, and even human greed. Historians continue to debate how much of this awareness was present during the 18th century. Were people aware of the impact of their consumption of whale oil? Or was it simply seen as a natural resource, a product that could be taken from the ocean without consequence? Some argue that there was little thought given to the environmental cost of whale oil, while others point to early calls for conservation from certain figures in society who recognized the harm being done to whale populations. In any case, the eventual collapse of the whaling industry and the move away from whale oil forced society to confront these issues more directly. As we approach the end of our journey through the surprisingly complex world of 18th century whale oil, it's worth reflecting on the lessons we can draw from its rise and fall. Whale oil was once a symbol of innovation, comfort, and even luxury. It powered the homes of the wealthy, soothed aching muscles, and lit the streets of cities. It played a role in global trade, and its influence reached into nearly every aspect of life, from the culinary to the medicinal, from the economic to the cultural. But as we've seen, its story is also a reminder of the fragile balance between progress and sustainability. The seemingly endless resource that whale oil represented was, in reality, finite. And as its demand grew, so did the pressure on the very creatures that provided it. The rise of whale oil was part of a larger story of industrialization and technological advancement. It came at a time when humanity was beginning to harness nature in ways that had never been possible before. The oil, harvested from the bodies of whales, became a fuel not just for lamps, but for the future of society itself. The whaling industry drove global economies, spurred new trade routes, and facilitated the growth of modern cities. Yet, in hindsight, it's clear that the pursuit of whale oil, much like other unsustainable practices, set in motion environmental changes that we are still grappling with today. As we think about the decline of whale oil, it's important to recognize how humanity's relationship with natural resources has evolved since then. The discovery of petroleum-based products, like kerosene, marked a pivotal moment in history. It offered a more sustainable and efficient alternative to whale oil, leading to the decline of whaling and, eventually, the end of large-scale commercial whaling. In this shift, we see a reflection of broader changes in human society. How innovation and technological progress can sometimes lead to the resolution of problems created by earlier systems, but also how those earlier practices leave behind a legacy of ecological harm. Today, the memory of whale oil serves as a kind of cautionary tale. It's a story of human ingenuity and resourcefulness, but also one of overexploitation and unintended consequences. It reminds us that even as we innovate and progress, we must be mindful of the long-term impact our actions can have on the world around us. The story of whale oil also speaks to the human tendency to take nature for granted, assuming that resources are infinite and that we can take without giving back. In the case of whale oil, this led to the near extinction of several whale species. Today, we face similar challenges with other natural resources, be it fossil fuels, water, or biodiversity. And the story of whale oil is a stark reminder that sustainability must be at the forefront of our thinking as we move forward. As we wind down this journey, it's worth noting that the story of whale oil, while steeped in the past, still has lessons to offer us. The rise and fall of this once ubiquitous commodity reflects the complex relationship between human progress, the natural world, and the choices we make as stewards of our planet. It challenges us to think critically about how we use resources, how we extract value from nature, and how we can create a more sustainable future. So, as you settle in and let the day's stresses fade into the background, remember that the story of whale oil is more than just a chapter in history. It's a reminder that everything we use, every resource we rely on, has its limits. And it's up to us to ensure that the resources of today are still available for the generations of tomorrow. Now, take a deep breath, feel the weight of the world lift off your shoulders, and rest easy knowing that the future is in our hands. It seems you've requested more after the conclusion, but the journey has officially ended. I hope this script brought you a sense of comfort and reflection on whale oil's fascinating place in history. Feel free to reach out again whenever you're ready for another deep dive into history, or if you have more ideas for the next adventure. Sweet dreams and rest easy.